The LA Kings post a weekend sweep. One of them was the best win of the year. We've got a recap, analysis, and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we are on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast. New episode out today. A weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. The LA Kings started their 5-game homestand with a pair of games this past weekend, a marquee matchup on Saturday against division rival Edmonton, and then on Sunday, Philadelphia was in town. We're going to start with the big one on Saturday against the Oilers, the first meeting between the two teams since their most recent playoff series won by Edmonton in 5 games. The lineup in this one for the Kings, for head coach Jim Hiller, he would continue with that 11-7 setup that has worked so well for the Kings. Trevor Moore was placed on injured reserve, but head coach Jim Hiller said it was just procedural so they could activate Arthur Kaliev and put him on the roster. Trevor Moore is not more seriously injured than previously thought. He's day-to-day, but Kaliev on the roster now for the Kings, but was a healthy scratch in this game. The forwards would be Anze Kopitar on the top line, centering Adrian Kempe and Alex Turcotte. Quinton Byfield centering the second line with Tanner Jeannot and Warren Foegele. Phillip Danault back in the lineup after missing 1 game and then had the holiday break to heal up. He was back centering the third line with Kevin Fiala and Alex Laferriere. And Samuel Hellenius again centering the fourth line. Akil Thomas would be one of the wingers. The other winger would be rotated amongst the other forwards. The defensive pairings exactly the same with the extra defensemen, Mikey Anderson, Vladislav Gavrikov, Joel Edmondson, Brant Clark, Jacob Moverara, and Jordan Spence, and Kyle Burrows was the 7th and extra defenseman. Darcy Kemper getting the start in net against the Oilers, and that meant we'd see David Riddick as the starter on Sunday against Philadelphia, but again, Kemper going against Edmonton. So the big question for me coming into this game, how would the Kings respond to this challenge, taking on one of the hottest teams in the NHL, a team that obviously is a team that we've grown to hate, since they've eliminated the Kings 3 straight years in the playoffs, a team that the Kings are battling with right now for playoff positioning. And of course, LA coming off of the 5-day break, no games over 5 days, Monday through Friday, for the holiday break. They did have a practice on Friday, but would the Kings be energized or would they be a little bit rusty? Let's get to the game summary in this one. And all things considered, I thought the Kings looked pretty good energy right from the start, but unfortunately it didn't translate into getting the first goal of the game. The Oilers would score about halfway through the opening period, but the Kings would respond well, getting goals from Quinton Byfield, his 7th, and Warren Foegele, his 10th. LA had a 2-1 lead after the opening period. In the second period, Oilers would tie it up on a power play goal in the opening minutes and then take the lead on a goal from former King Victor Arvidsson. It was 3-2 Edmonton heading into the third, but LA would respond again. Opening minutes of the third, Tanner Jeannot scores to tie it up at 3-3, his 5th of the year. We would eventually go overtime. We know that has not been a fun place for the Kings this year, but it was on this night as Quinton Byfield scores his 2nd of the game to win it in sudden death, to give the Kings not only a win over one of the hottest teams in the league, not only a win over a team the Kings have lost to 3 straight years in the playoffs, not only a win against the team the Kings could very well face once again in the playoffs, not only a win against the team they're chasing in the standings for home ice advantage in a potential first-round playoff matchup, but the Kings finally win an overtime game. First overtime win of the season. 4-3 is the final. Kings improved to 20-10-5 on the season. 11-2-1 on home ice as they pull even with the Oilers in the Pacific Division standings, each team with 45 points through 35 games. Yes, just a regular season win, but I think you could say it was the Kings' biggest win of the year considering all the things I just mentioned. As for the game stats in this one, again, Kings win at 4-3 in overtime. Shots on goal favored LA 29-27. Power plays, the Kings were 0 for 1, Edmonton 1 for 2. Faceoffs favored the Kings 33-28, faceoff wins. Hits favored LA 25-13, and block shots favored the Kings 15-11. As those stats would indicate, sometimes the stats tell the story, sometimes they don't. Pretty even game. I thought a good hockey game between two good teams. Kings had the slight edge on the scoreboard and in the stat sheet as well. So, what was good for the Kings from a team standpoint in the win over the Oilers? The energy was good. This was a big game. You could feel it in the arena. I was out there at crypto.com arena. You could feel it in the atmosphere. The fans were into it. The players were into it on both sides right from the start. Obviously, with the history and a division matchup between these two teams, the Kings were flying around all over the ice. And I would say if I was concerned, about the energy level, that went away very quickly. Kings were really active with their sticks in this game. They were breaking up passes. They were creating turnovers and just generally being disruptive with their sticks. Kings did an amazing job as a team defensively on Oilers superstars Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, who each had just one assist. Matter of fact, McDavid, the three-time league MVP, had no shots on goal in this game. Kudos to all the Kings for playing an amazing team defensive game. I love the resiliency the Kings had in this one, coming back twice from being down. Obviously winning in overtime is huge. The Kings were 0-5 this season in games that went beyond regulation. But they are able to get it done in this big matchup. And I liked how Jim Hiller, I'd mentioned this before, used some of the younger players in overtime, some of the more creative players like Alex Laferriere, like Quentin Byfield, who scored the game-winning goal. But a great team effort and a great team win for the Kings in this one. What was not so good for LA from a team standpoint? Well, I think the number one concern that you do take away from this game against the Oilers was the Kings' penalty kill. Now, they only had 2 moments where they were shorthanded, and they did kill off the second Oilers power play in a key moment, tied 3-3 in the third. But the first power play that the Oilers had, they scored quickly and easily. So the Kings, if you've been paying attention, changed their philosophy on the penalty kill this year to be more aggressive, specifically to try and combat the Oilers power play. Success on the second one, but failure on the first one. So we'll need to see more of that going forward against the Oilers to see how it works specifically against them, because like I said, this really was implemented specifically to try and stop the Oilers power play from being so effective should the Kings face them once again in the playoffs, which frankly it looks like they will. But that's for another day. That was really the only thing, though, for me that I was concerned about in this game against the Oilers. Other than that, great hockey game, 2 good teams going at it, and great to see the Kings pull it out in the end. Coach's quote from Jim Hiller in this one, and he was talking about the Byfield line, Quentin Byfield, Warren Foegele, and Tanner Jeannot scoring all 4 goals and being the best line on the ice without question for the Kings. He said, did Jim Hiller after the game, quote, "I think we have a really solid team with a lot of different players, unique players. I think that line in particular is very tenacious. Jeannot doesn't skate as quick as Q and Fogues, but he's tenacious. He's on pucks. He's physical. They're all 3 that. And I thought, if you notice, Q was really physical tonight too. So he added that element, or he has that element. He doesn't bring it consistently enough. Tonight he did. That line was really good. It's the best they've played all year. There's no question." End quote. So my big takeaway from the win over the Oilers, now it's just one game, but it did feel like kind of a statement game. Obviously, the history the two teams have against each other recently. The Oilers were playing as well as any team in the NHL coming into that game. They're led by probably the MVP of the league at this point, Leon Draisaitl. Kings go toe-to-toe against a very, very good team and absolutely did not blink. Stepped up to the challenge. Mentioned that Draisaitl and McDavid only had a point each, an assist each. Kings made it very hard on them to do what they do well. That's a great sign. They'll need to do that going forward, obviously, if they do match up against them. But I think bigger than all of that to me from this game is Quentin Byfield stepping up. 2 great goals, 2 big goals in a big game against a very good team. A big team win for the Kings and a big individual game from Quentin Byfield is the big takeaway from that victory over the Edmonton Oilers. All right, so that's only one game We still have another game to talk about. We will do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. And did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying twice for? Well, that definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistance for your finances. Rocket Money also monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members over $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, let's get to the second game that the Kings played over the weekend. That was against the Philadelphia Flyers. One night later, after the win over the Oilers, the lineup in this one for the LA Kings was just slightly different. We would have the same three forward lines, but Andre Lee would be inserted on the fourth line in place of Akil Thomas. The defense would be exactly the same, but of course, a different goaltender, David Rittich, getting the start one night after Darcy Kemper gets the win over Edmonton. My big question going to this game was, would the Kings respond emotionally after a huge win, the day before? Could they get back out there and, they're obviously not taking on an opponent like Edmonton. Could they bring that emotion? Could they bring that energy that they had against Philadelphia? Well, the game summary in this one, the Kings would get the first goal of the game early thanks to Kevin Fiala's wrist shot, his 14th of the year, but Philadelphia would respond with back-to-back goals to reclaim a 2-1 lead. Adrian Kempe, though, would score the fourth goal of the game and the fourth goal of the opening period, a wild opening period. We were tied 2-2 after one. Second period, Flyers get back-to-back goals to take a 2-goal lead, but Warren Fogle scored a huge goal on a breakaway to make it a 1-goal game going into the third. In the third, the captain, Anze Kopitar, would come up huge with 2 goals. First one to tie it, second one on the power play was the go-ahead goal, and the Kings hold on for the 5-4 victory. Kings improved to 21-10-5 on the season, 12-2-1 at home with their 7th straight win on home ice, and they're now 2-0 on this 5-game homestand. The stats in this one against Philadelphia, 5-4 Kings win it. Shots on goal favored the Flyers 21-20. Special teams, the Kings 1 for 1 on the power play. Philadelphia is 0 for 1. Faceoffs were dead even, 25 apiece. Hits favored LA 24-14. Block shots favored Philadelphia 20-12. So what was good from a team standpoint for the LA Kings and their win over the Flyers? Well, I thought the Kings showed a lot of resiliency, kind of like they did against Edmonton. The Flyers play a difficult run and gun style, very different than what the Kings are used to. And the Kings did have some trouble in the first period, but adjusted and then was able to dictate the pace of the game to a style much more to their liking over the second and third periods. Another strong third period for the Kings, which has been their best period all season long. And getting a power play goal in a key moment and having that power play goal be the game winner, that's big for the Kings. I love how the Kings turned the tables on Philadelphia, who scored a couple of greasy goals early in this one, but the game tying and the game winning goals for LA were pucks on net, traffic in front, and good things happening. What was not so good from a team standpoint for the Kings, LA did not start strong, even though they got the first goal of the game. The Flyers were the better team in the first period. That was not totally shocking considering coming off that emotional win over the Oilers and having to go right back at it again. But the Kings, once they got into the flow of the game, they were the better team in the second and third periods, and they were tied after the first. So it wasn't like they were, outplayed or, blown out of the water. The Flyers were really good, though, at taking the puck to the net. And that's one thing that's a little bit of a concern over the last handful of games is teams having a relatively easy time going to the net, getting good position in the crease for tap-in goals. That happened a couple of times for the Flyers. They did have some puck luck. They were throwing it on net from all kinds of different angles behind the net, going off players and getting into key positions. But that's one thing the Kings could certainly polish up from the game against Philadelphia is being stronger in front of the net. The coach's quote from Jim Hiller after the win over Philadelphia talked about getting the game-winning goal on the power play. He said, quote, "Those are big goals. They're big moments. And when you can score, it's hard to score in the league. When you can get one as tonight as the game-winning goal, it makes all the difference in the world. We just haven't done enough of that this year, but you can see how important it is when the power play comes through for you." End quote. So what is my big takeaway from these two wins over the weekend for the Kings? First off, Quentin Byfield coming up big in a big game. That's huge. We need that from Q going forward. Overtime game winner, obviously. And the Kings hadn't won in overtime all year, so that was huge to get that kind of monkey off their back. Big to overcome, deficits in big games, which they did in both the Oilers game and the Flyers game. Big to get the game-winning goal against Philadelphia on the power play, something that the Kings obviously have struggled with this year. So a lot of big things from this weekend. It wasn't just two wins for me. First of all, again, Byfield stepping up and playing well of late in a big game, in a key moment. That's big. The Kings showing resiliency, coming back both times to win, getting key goals in a third period, getting an overtime win, and then scoring a power play goal to win a game. Those are a lot of things the Kings haven't done this year. If they can start to do some of those things, Byfield gets going, power play is at least contributing, keep having those strong third periods. I mean, these are all recipes for playoff success. And that's what the Kings have been all about from the offseason to now, is setting things up for the playoffs, being grittier, being more blue collar, adding those types of players, having the young players step up and taking a bigger role. Again, there's still a lot of season left to go. I'm seeing some very encouraging signs of what the Kings are doing, and I thought we saw a great example of it specifically from this weekend. Looking at some individual players over the weekend, we'll start with the goaltending. Darcy Kemper, I thought, solid against the Oilers. He stopped 27 shots. He had one goal allowed that was a bad goal on him. The first goal was a bad rebound right in front that was put in easily. Other than that, I thought he was pretty solid. He did have an outstanding save late in the game, 3-3 in the third period, second power play for the Oilers. Zach Hyman gets all alone in front of the net, and Kemper absolutely robbed him. That was huge. But a good, solid game for Darcy Kemper. He wasn't outstanding, but he was very good. He improves to 9-2-5 on the season. And then David Riddick, he struggled a bit against the Flyers. They made it difficult on him. He was fighting the puck a little bit. They were kind of putting it on him from all over the place. Off bodies in front of him, off of him, goals that were going in. But overall, got the job done. Stood tall in the third period, which obviously was a key to get the win. Overall, David Riddick, 11-8 on the season, but at home, Big Save Dave is now 8-1 at Crypto.com Arena. We've talked about Quentin Byfield, energy against the Oilers like I have not seen before. Maybe I was kind of watching Q a bit, and I wasn't watching the TV broadcast on this one. I was up in the press box, and you could just see his energy all over the ice. I thought it was the best game of his career in totality, especially when you take into consideration the opponent and being a big game. He was flying. He was forechecking. He was active with his stick, and the two goals he scored were fantastic. Both of them wrist shots into the top corner. Great goals, great skill. I know that they've been talking about Q working on his shot. Certainly showed off in this one. And he did a motion, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'll do it. But after the game-winning goal against Edmonton, he kind of did this thing with his hand. It wasn't a throat slash. It was kind of like, it's over. It's over. And considering he's kind of struggled this year, some people may be like, "Hey, Q, okay, well, calm down a little bit." I'm very good with it. I want to see him playing with attitude. I want to see him playing with swagger. I think he's a better player when he does that. So I had no problem with it whatsoever. I hope we see it a lot more this season. But for Quentin Byfield, he has 8 goals and 19 points now in the season, but 5 goals and 8 points in his last 7 games. So we've talked about it. Him and Kevin Fiala getting it going, turning it around. If they can both contribute something similar to this the rest of the way, the Kings are going to be a very difficult team to contend with. I want to talk a little bit more about a couple other players for the Kings that really shined from over the weekend. We will do that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, get ready to tackle the NFL action as the season winds down. It's certainly not over yet. We've got the playoffs as well. Do it with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to know to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we are talking a lot of things here on this show as we had two big games to recap from over the weekend. Wanted to continue talking about some of the players that stood out from over the weekend. I got to talk about Warren Fogle. Maybe a little extra juice for Fogle against his old team. It was kind of interesting that we saw two players score against their former teams, Victor Arvidsson for Edmonton and Warren Fogle for LA. But Fogle, frankly, if you're going to look at the head-to-head matchup in that regard, was the better player overall. We talked about how great the Byfield line was with Tanner Jeannot and Warren Fogle and Quentin Byfield. Fogle, like he's done all year, but even maybe a little bit more in this one, bringing the energy against the Oilers on the forecheck, just does everything so well. He's just all over the ice. He's smart positionally and knows where to go. The goal he scored against Edmonton, just being kind of tenacious around the net. It wasn't even really a shot. It was a loose puck off a Jordan Spence shot that hit bodies, and he just swung his stick around and got his stick on it, and that was enough to get into the net. So by any means necessary, right? They all count the same, whether they're pretty or not. And then the goal against Philadelphia, huge moment, huge opportunity. He makes a great steal, shoots down the ice on a breakaway, and I'm telling my wife as we're watching on the couch, got to score on this, and he scores. The initial save was made, but he stayed with it and put a rebound in. That's a huge goal. We talk about at times when the Kings have lost games not converting on their opportunities. That was a key moment that needed to be converted on, and Warren Fogle absolutely did. And going into a third period, it's a huge difference being down 1 as opposed to being down 2. So that was a key goal in the Kings comeback. Warren Fogle had a goal and 2 assists against the Oilers. Obviously, that big goal against Philadelphia on the season now, 11 goals, 11 assists for 22 points. A great offseason addition by Rob Blake for the LA Kings, Warren Fogle. Andrei Kopitar, the captain, continues to get it done. Obviously, he didn't have any points in the Oilers win, but helping out, playing the center position defensively against Connor McDavid, did his job defensively. And then the two big goals against Philadelphia, game-tying goal, game-winning goal. Neither were works of art, both blue-collar goals. First one goes off his body after a Quentin Byfield slap shot, ricocheted to him, goes in. That's going to the net. Good things happen. And then the power play goal that turned out to be the game winner, Kopitar wins the face-off to start it off, pulls it back to Kempe, and then immediately turns his back and goes to the net looking for a deflection. Kempe shoots it. Kopitar gets his stick on it, deflects it past the goaltender, and that's your game-winning goal. So the captain getting the job done, leading the way. 12 goals now in the season for Kopi. Team high 39 points in 36 games. And the two goals for Kopitar, numbers 430 and 431 in his career. He is now tied with Hall of Famer, or actually not Hall of Famer, Kings Hall of Famer, Dave Taylor, for the third most goals in franchise history. Also, real quick, wanted to mention Jordan Spence. I had talked on a show last week about players who had and had not met expectations this season. And I said that Spence was one of the players for me who hadn't met expectations. Thought he had a very solid game, very solid couple of games over the weekend. Had a goal. Well, he didn't have a goal. He had an assist. He had 2 assists in the Oilers game. But the one on the Tanner Jeannot goal, I know Jeannot gets credit for it, but that was Jordan Spence. A beautiful shot pass right on the tape of Jeannot. All he has to do is hold his stick tight, and it deflects into the net. That was a great play by Jordan Spence. On the season, he now has 12 points and 10 assists. I thought a solid weekend for Jordan Spence, which is obviously very good to see. Kevin Fiala, we talked about it. We saw good Kevin, especially in the game against the Flyers. He was flying, no pun intended, all over the ice against Philadelphia early on. Really active, had a shooting mentality, and got the Kings on the scoreboard first. 14 goals now for Fiala, 22 points in the season. And we talk about Quentin Byfield heating up of late. In the last 9 games for Kevin Fiala. He has 5 goals. When Fiala and Byfield are producing, this team is, I think, good enough offensively when you consider Kopitar and Kempe and everybody else who's chipping in, LaFerriere, and then other guys scoring as well, Fogle. So when those two guys are going, it's a big, big deal for the LA Kings. So 2 games over the weekend, that means we've got a chance, and 2 wins. We get to give out 3 stars for 2 different games. And for the first game against Edmonton, my 3 stars are just slightly different than the actual 3 stars that were announced. Warren Fogle was given the number 1 star of the game. I think they must have, I don't know how they do this, but they must have voted on it at the end of regulation. But Quentin Byfield is the number 1 star. Jordan Spence, though, my number 3 star, talked about it, 2 assists against Edmonton. Warren Fogle had a great, great game against Edmonton as well with the goal and 2 assists. He's my number 2 star. But there's no question to me who the number 1 star of the game against the Oilers was. It was absolutely Quentin Byfield. Like I said, I think maybe his best game as a pro. And then as far as the 3 stars for the game against Philadelphia, we got Warren Fogle as my number 3 star with that big, big goal late, or not late, but in the middle of the second period to get the Kings within 1 goal. Adrian Kempe, a goal and an assist. He's my number 2 star. And Anze Kopitar, the captain, with the game tying and the game winning goals. Clearly the number 1 star. But I would have to say, if you were looking at 3 stars for the weekend, I think Warren Fogle might be my number 1 star of the weekend. He had key moments in both wins over Edmonton and over Philadelphia. All right, so let's look at the division. Where are the Kings now as they pick up those 2 big wins, including the head-to-head win over the Edmonton Oilers. And right now, the Kings are back in second place in the Pacific Division. Vegas continues to be outrageously hot. They're kind of pulling away a little bit. There's still a lot of hockey left. 82-game season. Both teams have played 36 games. Actually, all 3 of the top 3 teams in the league, Vegas, are in the division. Vegas, LA, Edmonton have all played 3 games. But Vegas is really kind of taking it to another level at this point. I think they've won like 10 of 11 or something like that. They've got 53 points, so they've got a 6-point lead on LA. But the Kings are back in that second spot. Edmonton now 2 points behind. The Oilers lost to the Ducks on Sunday, so that helped. Thanks, Anaheim. But look, it looks like it's going to be LA and Edmonton. We'll see. But these games are huge. The positioning is huge because it determines who has home ice advantage in that first-round playoff matchup. And we've seen how good the Kings are on home ice this year. I believe they have the second-best home ice winning percentage in the entire NHL. Vancouver and Calgary are still hanging around, but again, we're focusing on Edmonton and LA, and it just looks like it's going to be those 2 teams battling for home ice the rest of the way. So big, huge win for the Kings over the Oilers, obviously for many reasons on Saturday, but for this season as well, for possible playoff positioning. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. A lot to talk about, obviously, with the 2 games. Didn't have time to give you a rain report. We'll try and maybe do that on tomorrow's show or Wednesday's show. But for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, I didn't mention, the Kings have 1 game this week. So Wednesday they play against New Jersey, another big opponent coming to town. That's going to be a big test. But no games on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. So we're going to schedule a couple of guests, and one of them is going to join us on Tuesday. That would be Mikey Alexander. You may or may not know who that is. If you go to Kings games, you know who it is. If you don't go to Kings games, we'll introduce you to him. He's a fan of the show. Been trying to get him on for a while. He's one of the 2 in-arena hosts for the LA Kings. So we're going to talk to him about that role and what it's like to be doing that during Kings games during the season. Wednesday, the Kings are playing the Devils in an afternoon game. That's a New Year's Day game, the only game in the NHL that day, which is weird. It's a 3:00 game, LA time. So after that game on Wednesday, shortly after, we will have a recap show of that big game against one of the better teams in the NHL, the New Jersey Devils. So that'll be fun. Hope to talk about another home win. And then on Thursday, we'll look for another special guest. Friday, of course, will be our fan feedback show. Once again, you want to get in on that? The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to get your comments in the comments section. Stay connected with the show on social media, on X, on Twitter, on Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. If you're following us on X, you saw Ed and Brea apologizing for guaranteeing that the Kings were going to lose against the Oilers. That was a fun moment. So again, follow us on X, Twitter, and Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. A fun weekend, a busy weekend for the LA Kings. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, as the Kings are looking great on home ice. What a big win over the Oilers. That was a fun weekend and a fun show to talk about it with you guys today. Stay connected, I mentioned, on social media at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. And as always, go Kings, go.